What would you do if someone publicly humiliated your family, tearing open old wounds in front of a crowd? In the sleepy town of Willow Creek, where everyone knew each other's secrets, the answer wasn't just words, it was a reckoning. The air in the town hall was thick with tension that humid July evening. The meeting was supposed to be about the new park renovations, a mundane topic for a community of 2,000 souls. My father, Henry, sat in the front row, his weathered hands clutching his cane. At 78, he was a quiet man, his life etched in the lines of his face, decades of labor as a mechanic, raising 3 kids, and burying my mother 5 years ago. He wasn't one for speeches, but he'd come to voice his hope for a bench in the park to honor her memory. Simple, heartfelt, that was Dad. Across the room sat Karen Whitaker, a woman whose name carried a sharp edge in Willow Creek. She was in her late 40s, with a perpetually pinched expression, as if life owed her something. Karen ran a small real estate office and had a reputation for bulldozing anyone who crossed her. She'd moved to town a decade ago, and ever since, she'd made it her mission to fix Willow Creek her way or no way. Tonight, she was here to push for a flashy fountain in the park, one that screamed her name more than the town's spirit. The meeting started calmly enough. Mayor Thompson droned on about budgets, and a few residents shared their thoughts. Then Dad stood up, his voice steady but soft. "I'd like a bench for my late wife, Clara," he said. "A place for folks to rest and remember what matters." The room nodded, murmurs of agreement rippling through. I sat a few rows back, proud of him for speaking up, my heart swelling at the thought of Mom's name carved into oak. Karen stood next, her heels clicking sharply on the wooden floor. "With all due respect," she began, her tone dripping with anything but, "we don't need another bench clogging up the park. This town needs progress, not sentimental clutter. Henry, you've been retired for what, 15 years? Living off your kids and Social Security like some leech. Why should we listen to you?" The room froze, my breath caught in my throat. A leech? My father, who'd worked until his hands bled, who'd given everything for us. I saw Dad's shoulders slump, his eyes drop to the floor. The crowd whispered, some in shock, others in discomfort. I wanted to scream, to lunge across the room, but I stayed rooted, my fists clenched. Before I could act, a voice cut through the silence. "That's enough, Karen." It was Lila Monroe, the town librarian, a wiry woman in her 60s who rarely spoke at meetings. Her voice trembled with anger, not fear. "Henry's no leech. He's the heart of this town, and you'd know that if you cared about anyone but yourself." The crowd murmured again, this time with approval. Lila wasn't done. "You've been bullying people for years, Karen, calling folks names, pushing your weight around. It stops tonight." Karen's face flushed red, but she didn't back down. "This is a public forum, Lila. I'm entitled to my opinion. If Henry can't handle it, maybe he shouldn't be here." She turned to the crowd, expecting support, but found none. The room was with Dad, with Lila, with decency. I drove Dad home that night, his silence heavier than the summer air. "She's wrong, Dad," I said, gripping the steering wheel. "You're no leech." He just stared out the window, his cane resting between his knees. "Some folks," he whispered, "don't know what it means to hurt." The next morning, Willow Creek buzzed with the story. Karen's outburst wasn't just gossip, it was a spark. People started sharing their own run-ins with her. The time she'd berated a single mom at the grocery store. The way she'd pressured old Mr. Jenkins to sell his land. Karen wasn't just opinionated. She was cruel. And Dad, the quiet widower, had become the town's breaking point. Couldn't let it go. Neither could Lila. She called me the next day, her voice sharp with purpose. "Ellie," she said, "I've been keeping a record. Every nasty thing Karen said or done in public. It's not just your dad. She's been harassing people for years." I was stunned. Lila, the unassuming librarian, had been quietly documenting Karen's reign of terror? It was the twist I hadn't seen. Kaminga's soft-spoken woman with a steel spine, ready to fight. Lila's records were meticulous. Dates, times, witnesses, even a few recorded voicemails Karen had left for neighbors. It was enough to make a case. We met with a lawyer, Gwynn, who'd grown up in Willow Creek and had no love for Karen's antics. "This is harassment," Sarah said, flipping through Lila's notes. "Repeated, targeted behavior meant to intimidate. We can take her to court." The decision wasn't easy. Dad didn't want to fuss, but I saw the toll Karen's words had taken. He wasn't eating much, and he'd stopped going to his weekly card games. "It's not just about me," he said finally. "It's about stopping her from hurting someone else." That was Dad always thinking of others, even when he was the one bleeding. The court date came 3 months later. The small county courtroom was packed, Willow Creek's residents spilling into the aisles. Karen sat at the defense table, her lawyer arguing she'd only exercised free speech. But Lila's evidence was damning. Testimonies from 10 different people, each recounting Karen's venom. The single mom she'd shamed, the elderly man she'd pressured, and Dad, whose dignity she'd tried to strip away in front of the town. I testified too, my voice shaking as I described Dad's life, his sacrifices, his love for Mom, the way he still left flowers at her grave every Sunday. "Karen didn't just call him a name," I said. "She tried to erase who he is." The judge, a stern woman named Clara Ironic, given Mom's name, listened intently. When Dad took the stand, his quiet strength filled the room. "I don't want revenge," he said. "I just want peace." Karen's defense crumbled. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a passionate community member, but the judge wasn't buying it. "Ms. Whitaker," Judge Clara said, "your words have caused measurable harm. Freedom of speech does not mean freedom to harass." The verdict came swiftly, guilty of harassment. Karen was fined $5,000 and ordered to complete 200 hours of community service. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause, a collective exhale from a town that had held its breath too long. But the victory felt hollow. As we left the courthouse, I noticed Dad's steps were slower, his eyes distant. The trial had reopened wounds I hadn't realized were still raw. At home, he sat in his armchair, staring at a photo of Mom. "She'd have hated all this fuss," he said, a tear slipping down his cheek. "But she'd have been proud of you, Ellie." The park bench was approved a month later, engraved with "In memory of Clara, who loved this town." It became a place where people sat to share stories, to heal. Karen, meanwhile, faded from Willow Creek's spotlight. Her real estate office lost business, and whispers followed her wherever she went. She wasn't a villain in a storybook, just a woman who'd let bitterness poison her heart. But the real sting came a year later. I found Dad's journal, tucked away in his desk after he passed quietly in his sleep. He'd written about that night at the town hall, about Karen's words cutting deeper than he'd let on. "I've never been a leech," he wrote, "but maybe I've leaned too much on Ellie. She deserves her own life." My heart shattered. He'd carried that shame, that doubt, until the end, despite everything we'd done to prove Karen wrong. I sat on Mom's bench that evening, the journal in my lap, tears blurring the ink. The town had won, but Dad had lost something irreplaceably, a piece of his spirit, stolen by a cruel word. Karen's conviction hadn't given him back his peace. It hadn't undone the hurt, and that was the bitterest truth of all. Sometimes, justice comes too late to heal the ones we love. ND.